Welcome to the Sounding Board podcast with me, Nick Elliott, and my very good brother, Mr. Andrew Elliott.
Hello.
Good evening. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. I'm celebrating the new regulations that have come into force.
It's the 1st of June and the regulations are out. What we said last time was we needed to actually clap our eyes on this nonsense before we put our judgments across. Now that you've seen it...
So I haven't looked at them in as much detail as you have.
Well, they came out last night.
Yeah, I've had a quick look today. Is it me, or are they? I mean, I know we destroyed the first kind of couple of sets of regulations, but these are even worse.
They're getting worse, aren't they?
I mean, they're just appalling. I mean, they're poorly written, and there's nothing good about them. They don't make sense.
No. As soon as I started reading a couple of bits to a colleague of mine at work. He's like, "Yeah, what are you up to this morning?" I'm just going through the regulations, make sure we're covered as a business and what we can do and all this. And I read just one paragraph of one of the new sections. He's like, "Right, yeah, but it depends how they define that, doesn't it?" And I was like, "Yes,
all the way through."
Yes, it does.
All the way through.
And if you remember, I'd said about the previous sets, even as amended, that they've never defined what a gathering is, and that I think it's quite important that they define what a gathering is.
I was going to come on to that.
And they've defined what a gathering is. Well, do you want to talk about that then?
Okay, so this is the current regulations. So during the emergency period, unless paragraph 2 applies, no person may participate in a gathering which takes place in a public or private place.
That's a change.
It is.
From the last one. It was only ever regulating
only
gatherings
in public.
So now they've stepped into our house and our garden to regulate there.
There's no such thing as private property within these regulations. They've got jurisdiction everywhere. They've defined this twice. The first one is reasonable. Okay, I mean a reasonable as in it makes sense. So outdoors and consists of more than 6 persons. Yeah, that makes sense. As in it the regulation doesn't make sense to me, but it's understandable.
It's understandable.
The second one, indoors and consists of 2 or more persons. So you can have a gathering of one person indoors. How is that a gathering?
Well, it's not. That's what they're saying. Gathering.
It's crazy.
But then obviously they've changed the wording slightly to then list all the exceptions afterwards. And I suppose, right, if we backtrack a little, you're in Regulation 7, I think, there, aren't you? Regulation 6.
How the hell did you know that?
Regulation 6. I have come to know these documents. Regulation 6 is the restrictions on movement.
Yes.
That has always been the important bit. And that's where there's been this blanket regulation that says you're not allowed to leave your house, except, and then a list of what have they got reasonable excuses. Now, a fundamental change with these ones is that now that's been removed. You are now allowed to leave your house whenever you like. And so that list of reasonable excuses has gone completely. And what it's been replaced by is you're not allowed to stay overnight anywhere other than your own house. And the first time I saw this last night, I just started to try and get my head around what civil servant has sat there and gone, right, what can we allow, what can't we allow? Is this somehow trying to get at the people that have infringed in certain ways publicly and trying to make it so you can't go round someone's house? Because technically, as long as you had a reasonable excuse for leaving your house, say to do some exercise, and to be away from your house, say to do some exercise, then there was nothing stopping, for example, me travelling to your house, running to your house, and then doing exercise in your house with you. Technically, that was all allowed under the previous regulations. I don't think it's how people were interpreting them, but this is about the technicalities.
So, under the previous regulations, up until yesterday, so you could leave your house to do one of these things, which could be
including work.
exercise, work, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I could stay around your house after I've done that before going back. Is that the loophole?
Well, they did amend them, remember, to say, or being outside of your house. But again, the list of exceptions was identical. So as long as you left doing one of the exceptions and then stayed out doing one of the exceptions, then you were fine.
Because lots of people there've been lots of newspaper articles and people have been kind of posting on Twitter about saying, oh yeah, it's now against the law to have sex with anybody.
Yeah.
Surely
that doesn't live in your household.
That doesn't live in your household. Surely that was already against the law.
Surely that's exercise.
Okay.
And the gathering thing before, that was very, very loose before, Regulation 7 was this big before, and now it's like that big, was no more than 2 people. I mean, it was, in fact, to be fair, it talked only about public places. It didn't talk about private places. So again, I think that there was this general loophole that was, as long as you left with a particular reason and then were somewhere with a particular reason, then you couldn't be shopped for doing other things at the same time. If that kind of makes sense. I mean, this is just how stupid it all is, to try and get people to stay indoors. But now, yes, exactly. Most of the major newspapers, certainly the tabloids, have all picked up on this. You're not allowed to have sex in another house or whatever.
But I always thought that was the case. that it always astounded me how people just went along with it.
Yes.
I mean, obviously,
yes.
It doesn't affect you, right? Because we're both married. But for people, if you know,
that doesn't stop some people.
No, but you know what I mean, though.
Yeah.
That was the one thing that I thought. Hang on. 17, 18-year-olds aren't going to stand for this.
No, well, I don't think they have been. But now read the actual definition of the gathering then, because if you go further down, right at the end.
Hang on 7.
On 7, at the end of 7, you actually have the definition of gathering.
There is a gathering when 2 or more people are present together in the same place in order to engage in any form of social interaction with each other or to undertake any other activity with each other. Places indoors of it would be considered to be enclosed or substantially enclosed for the purpose of it's about some smoke-free zone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, somebody made a point on Twitter in that you can't have sex with somebody else in their home, but you could presumably hire a prostitute.
Hooker. Yeah.
And that's
because they're working.
Because they're working.
This is how stupid it is.
That's balmy.
But they've now moved from just regulating the public sphere to regulating the private sphere. Tell me just exactly how this is an easement of the lockdown.
Well, see, that's what I'm thinking. It sounds like they're clamping down on everything.
Yeah.
Other than the number 6, you can have 6 people in your garden now. Everything else seems to be clamping down.
The clenching of the fist. I agree with you.
Talking about woolly things as we were earlier, have you read the stuff about the elite athletes?
I mean, clearly the largest lobby groups that there's been in this, certainly that they've listened to, are the big sporting national bodies.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. What's an elite athlete?
Well, quite.
Am I an elite athlete?
By certain measures, I could be defined as an elite
I mean,
athlete.
so I used to be an elite athlete. I used to play volleyball for one of the top 2 teams in the country. And I reckon for my age still, in the over 40s bracket, I'm still a decent player. So, and what about people who are, I don't know, maybe you're not elite, but you're on your way to elite. When I was 17 years old, I was picked up by the team I played for 20 years, and I wasn't an elite athlete at the time, but they could see that I had potential. You're saying
that some kind of judgment is needed?
But you could be. It's just so bonkers.
But it's just like it with all of this. It's whether it's
Can I self-define as an elite athlete? I'm going to self-identify as an elite athlete. Well, maybe you could.
It's a good job there's nothing gender specific in here, isn't there? I mean, that would be obviously against the Equalities Act, but actually, is it not equal and fair that I get to define myself as an elite athlete as well? Surely lots of people are going to do that now in order to be able to do all the things that an elite athlete can do.
Yeah, of course.
So, the parts of the regulations that we've never really delved into particularly, which are to do with the specific shutting of businesses. So there are literally lists of types of sectors and businesses that have to shut. Now, that has grown a lot in this one. So again, where they've seen loopholes, where people have opened up a theme park because it's not a fun fair, they've added theme park. Okay? They've even added this strange, slightly oblique definition of the London Eye, on there. In order, one assumes, to eventually allow it to run, but also specifically to make sure that they can say, no, you can't run, because there's this. I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. What the definition is of this rotating viewing something or other that they've put in here, and you can just go, that's still in the night. But in terms of the retail hotels and things like that, there are exceptions in there for people who work, for people, the elite athletes are now in there as well, that say that you're allowed to go to these hotels and things to work and to be an elite athlete, but none of them are going to be open.
That's crazy. I mean,
I must apologise now.
Hay fever.
I need to apologise, not because I'm suffering from COVID-19, but because I'm suffering from an incredibly high pollen count. And on our last podcast, I was sniffing and spluttering, and it must have been not very nice to listen to. I apologise again now, because this is not going to stop.
These regulations they definitely seem to be clamping down on more things and easing. They're kind of taking, giving with one hand and taking with the other.
But again, if you're running a hotel, and you can see here, right, I'm not allowed to run my hotel unless I've got clientele that are people who are having to travel for work because they're offering an essential service, because they're now an elite athlete. How are you going to open your hotel up for just this tiny, tiny proportion of people that you may get? I mean, you might operate next to some sporting attraction, training thing or something, which might work for you, but how are you going to make your money?
Okay, who's liable?
For what?
Well, so if somebody stays at your hotel, can they just say they're an elite athlete and you have to believe them? Do you have to check? Are you going to be liable for people who aren't elite athletes?
So
how does that work?
Let me bring you to the local school. Now, obviously, regular listeners of ours will know the battles I've been having with our local school and the teaching unions and the ridiculous interpretation and the going way, way further than the government guidance has even been saying in terms of social distancing with children. Now, the regulations say that critical workers, essential workers, key workers, whatever name you want to call them, there is a list of them. There is a list of job sectors, of which our jobs are included in there, in the tech industry, where our children are allowed to go to school and to be cared for so that we can carry on doing our important work. Now, our school has chosen to interpret that differently and chosen to say, oh, no, only if this is really serious frontline COVID-19, you've got to be swabbing someone in order to qualify, for sending your kids to this school. And early on, we kind of went, right, fair enough. Look, we can just about manage. We can rejig my wife's hours. I can do a bit less. We can work this out. We can look after the kids. What Boris announced a week or two ago was actually we want to encourage all the children of key workers to go back to school. And it was written in there, we want all children of key workers to go back to school. Our school, no. If you do that, I'm not going to be able to take the foundation in year 1 and year 6. No. Only if it's critical. They're making it up as they go along. So they're just deciding to apply a completely different set of judgments.
But that's what we said last time. There were the regulations, and then there was the guidance, and then there was what your teaching union was saying. Do you know the 2 metre rule?
That is not in law, and thankfully is still not in law.
Yeah. Do you know where that came from?
Well, obviously there's a WHO 1 metre, and then my understanding was that they just didn't trust us, so they doubled it.
It came from some studies on TB in the 1930s.
1930s?
They thought that 2 metres was a safe distance from TB, and it's just stuck.
That's just crazy.
Almost 100 years ago.
Did you see any of the, I think it was Chinese, pictures that have been drawn for the Spanish flu pandemic 100 years ago?
No.
They were doing the rounds on Twitter. It's absolutely amazing. I'll have to find them. Amazing pictures of classic state propaganda posters that are trying to get you to do something like wash your hands or cover your mouth. But it's all the same stuff that they're telling us now. They got the translations of this in English, and it was sneeze into the crook of your arm. I'd never even heard of doing that. To me, it was you sneeze in a tissue or you cover your mouth with your hand. Never all this kind of
you don't sneeze on your hand and you put your hand on something else.
I totally get that. But also the other thing was about staying outside, and it was saying we'll defeat this by washing our hands in sunlight and stuff like that. This is 100 years ago, but not a lot has changed since then. So the regulations are now, you're allowed to leave your house whenever you like, you're not allowed to stay anywhere else. So there's one freedom swapped for another kind of thing in there. There's all these exceptions for elite athletes and for everything else, and the gatherings are now up to 6, and I don't think that's very fair for a family of 6 that then have to tell the unfavourable child to go in the corner while they meet up with someone else in their garden or whatever. I think it's nonsense.
Well, so we said before, what's the time limit? Can you rotate?
Yeah.
So you have one child that kind of stays indoors for 5 minutes, and then you'll kind of move around chairs and play like musical chairs until everyone's seen everyone.
The Welsh, Northern Ireland, the Scottish, all slightly different. All slightly different sets of regs. 8 people. Was it the Welsh or was it the Northern Irish that it's only mixing with one other household?
Right.
But the household in its entirety. So you could have 2 families of 6 and you've got a group of 12. They've not put a cap on it.
That makes more sense.
In as much as any of it makes sense.
None of it makes sense, but that makes slightly more sense. The Welsh are really strict because my team's in Wales.
Not allowed to travel more than 5 miles. All this kind of stuff.
It's crazy.
But the fact that they are all different says to you what?
Nobody knows what they're doing. It's all guesswork.
It's all guesswork. Are you saying that this is not being led by the science?
It's all political.
All political.
All political.
Have you read any of the Sage minutes that have been released?
No, I've seen like a couple of people comment on them.
I think it's damning. Now, my understanding is they've only been released under pressure from that lawsuit. Is it Dolan? Yeah, with this lawsuit, which is fantastic. I'm really glad that this stuff is now out there. What it's showing, from what I've read, and I was specifically reading up the ones in the run-up to the lockdown, trying to find where they've gone right, and now we should do this, and we recommend this. They're not recommending anything of the sort. Anything of the sort. And you can just see that the Sage Committee were basically blindsided by the government going, oh yeah, by the way, we're locking down everyone. Completely. So, albeit, I think you and I were saying early on in this, like, bloody scientists and recommending this lockdown, all this kind of stuff. They weren't recommending anything as draconian as actually been introduced.
Yeah, I still think Neil Ferguson's an idiot. I think his models should be outlawed.
Yep.
But yeah, the Sage minutes themselves are nowhere near as bad as.
The other thing is,
they were steering clear of recommending that kind of thing. It appeared from what I heard.
Yeah, and then as you start going into the lockdown, the early April, there's like first few days of April, and there's one of these minutes saying, the R value is about 0.5, a maximum of 0.9. That's what the R value is right now. And that was at the point where the deaths were doing this, weren't they? And obviously it peaked early April, 10th, 9th, something like that, wasn't it?
April the 8th or 9th.
Something like that or whatever. But the point was that the transmission rate had already collapsed. Absolutely already collapsed.
Because deaths are sort of 2-3 weeks in advance of people catching it, aren't they?
I've got some third-hand information, from a GP that a colleague of mine knows and has talked to. Said, right, I've seen an awful lot of information now, just by virtue of my job and going to hospitals and stuff like this. Like, I've seen an awful lot. I've been tracking this the whole way through. It takes 4 to 5 weeks to die from this. Okay?
That long?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what he's saying. And so he said very specifically, and this was in front of a group of people, including my colleague, but that a lot of them were not very open with their scepticism, shall we say. And he said, based on the fact that it's taking this long, says to me the lockdown did nothing at all, because it was only a week or two before that peak hit. All the people that died then had all got it weeks and weeks and weeks ago.
Yeah, so I was looking at kind of when things were brought in, like the lockdown, like social distancing, and all this kind of stuff. The only thing that really appears to have made a difference is washing your hands. That's the thing that changed it.
Yeah.
Social distancing doesn't appear to have done anything. The lockdown certainly hasn't, because like we
most
picked
of the
really
social
early.
distancing happened during lockdown. It was maybe the week before of shops starting to do certain things, but most of it people were carrying on right up until the lockdown, weren't they? Yeah. So
it's washing your hands. That's the thing that did it. Washing your hands.
Well, but also, I mean, they're still talking about this thing having started way earlier than people think. Right. So, my in-laws came round today. Fantastic to see them. Big hugs, playing with the kids. That's most of our family, both sides of my family, that I've managed to see now, either in our house, in our garden, whatever, and not socially distanced with them. Now, they had a mystery illness earlier in the year. Now, I remember this very specifically, and we have on occasion talked about whether or not they had this thing or not, and certainly very high fever, bedridden. Only today they're sitting down and telling me the other symptoms that they had. I mean, Tony knocked them for 6, and I remember them saying afterwards it took them weeks to get over it, and this was late January, weeks to get over it, and also that it was unlike anything they'd ever seen before.
So what do they have, like the cough and the fever? And
They didn't have the cough.
okay,
They had the fever. They had a proper tightness round here at the lower part of your lungs, and loss of taste. So everything just tasted metallic.
right.
And I was like, you never told me that before. I was like, you've had it. You've totally had it. What was that?
You keep slamming
Oh,
your elbows
am
on
I
the
banging?
table.
Sorry. They've totally had it. And bear in mind that we dropped our kids off there for them to stay for 24 hours when they started developing the symptoms. We were like, hey, you'll be fine. Drop the kids off, pick them up again. One of them's in bed. So they probably passed it on. Who knows? I may have had it. But certainly I'm pretty sure, based on all the other little stories you hear now of people having these mystery illnesses that weren't specifically like flu or weren't specifically the winter vomiting bug and things like that.
Yeah, my mate, a friend of mine, thought he'd had it, and this would have been around, December or January, because he came back from holiday in the Middle East. He's got like family over there.
Right.
I think he was at Dubai or somewhere.
Right.
And he was proper rough.
Yeah.
Proper rough, and
Yeah.
and then it's only like recently he's like,
I think I had it.
hang on a second.
Yeah. Yeah. But obviously, as me and my wife are very much in that under 45 bracket like you. Our
Just,
kids are
yeah.
obviously easy. That it might have just basically bounced off us. And so
There's still no evidence that kind of kids pass it
No.
to and from adults, is there? So,
no, not at all. Not at all. But now we're in a situation where we're regulated in our gardens, we're regulated in our bedrooms, we're regulated everywhere. This didn't even get waved through. There's no scrutiny of this. This didn't. It's not like you and I are a lover of democratic institutions, but it didn't even get debated. It didn't even get looked at. There's no Commons, then House of Lords to make it a bit better. There's no revising. There's none of it. In fact,
that's statutory instruments.
that's
for
the
you.
statute. And as I said the last time, it's like never again will we be able to say, oh, it's just a regulation, because just a regulation kept us under house arrest. But going back to your point about it just being bad writing, what is the process of scrutiny internally to develop one of these pieces of nonsense?
Spell check on Microsoft Word. I think that's probably as far as it gets.
Send it to your mate, the intern in another department, for a bit of checking. It's balmy, isn't it? And there's now more words than in the original one for the easing of the lockdown. The easing of lockdown apparently needs to have more words and more restrictions than before.
So what do
Utter nonsense.
you think's next?
What, in terms of when they next ease something, what they actually add? Frankly, I have no idea. Based on the changes that they've made this time, I haven't got a clue. I mean, they ripped up 6 and 7 and replaced them. It wasn't little tweaks.
Yeah, I've been comparing, because you can do the little slide.
Yeah.
And you can compare.
Yep.
You can compare the two.
They
and they're
changed them
completely
fundamentally, And I think they might have to do the same thing again, because if it's no longer a total number of people in a gathering, for example, you can easily update a 6 to an 8 or a 10 or whatever. But if suddenly it's about the mixing of households or whatever, then you've got to fundamentally rewrite this stuff again. I think quite specifically they're not writing this for the next version. They're not thinking ahead. The grand plan that apparently they had, you think that they'd have it all written out ready. Have it all written out ready. This is what it's going to be.
Well, when they had their 5 tests, didn't they?
They love their tests.
We know they're not great tests, but they had their 5 tests
that were basically met on the day 1 of lockdown.
So why were they not thinking? Okay, we've got our 5 tests. Once these are met, this is what's going to happen.
Yes.
And why didn't they tell people in advance?
Excuse me. Because they might do it.
I'll tell you why. Because they had no idea.
No.
And they didn't want to get held to anything.
I think
they
this
wanted
stuff,
to see which way the wind was blowing and then make a political decision based on that.
I think this stuff got written in the last week, and I think the same happened last time. Excuse me. Oh, if only they could regulate pollen. No, don't start. Yeah, I think it's an absolute disaster of a document. It can only get worse.
I'm hoping that people finally realise that the government isn't on your side. Regulations aren't there to protect you. There's no such thing as private property. All the fundamental things that you and I have been banging on about for years.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that people are starting to wake up and thinking, hang on a second, I don't own my land anymore.
Do you want to talk about the protests or in the UK or the riots in the US?
I don't know too much. I don't know too much about them.
I've seen some pretty horrific videos.
Yeah, I mean, so there was the guy who had the policeman on his neck for like 9 minutes or something. George Floyd, who was.
That's how it all started.
Yeah. Who was, I mean, it's something like 15 times he said, "Look, I can't breathe."
It's horrible. It's horrible thing.
It's just, I mean, I haven't been able to watch it.
No, same here.
I'll just steer clear. And from what I understand, there were some perfectly reasonable protests that started out.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Quite peaceful, and then they were kind of taken over by
hijacked
Antifa and these people who were just any excuse for a ruck. And then that's when all the looting kind of started happening, and you've got the original protest. Because I'm hoping that the kind of the original protesters are going to fall out with Antifa over this, because
you'd hope so.
You've got the original protesters saying, "Hang on a second, what the hell are you doing?"
Master stroke from Trump, declaring them a terrorist organisation. This is not going to be an easy one to listen to with me sneezing every 2 seconds, is it?
So they are now a terrorist organisation.
Well, he's asking the State Department or whatever, however it works. Have you seen Twitter go nuts though with the whole? But the clue's in the name.
Well, yeah. So I tweeted a couple of a couple of days ago saying, Antifa are just anti-fascists. It's in the name, brought to you by the same people who declare that the National Socialists in the 1930s weren't socialists.
Like, they were lying, guys. They were lying. But they're not lying. Yeah.
I mean, the original kind of Antifa organisation back in there, and that would have been about the 30s as well. Were staunch communists. They were against the fascists, but only
because their way of authoritarianism was better.
Yeah. They were the kind of your tankies and Stalinists, or see before those two, but they're along those same lines.
So why have people been protesting in the UK? Why have people been chanting outside of Downing Street, "F the police"?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think,
just an excuse, isn't it?
I think it's just an excuse. I mean,
not socially distancing. None of these people. There's massive crowds, huge crowds in London.
That's another thing.
Double standards.
Make a note of this. So, the people who attended all the protests.
Yep.
Surely over the next couple of weeks they'll be dropping like flies.
But they won't, will they? Because it's
nonsense. Of course they won't.
But it'll get forgotten. It'll never get reported on. In fact, if you look at the coverage that the lockdown protests got, which were tiny in comparison to this, and the amount of police that turned up and all that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, James Delingpole was there, and he was asked to produce his papers and told to sod off.
Awful. You compare that to the coverage of these protests, and it's just a little footnote that says that they're breaking social distancing rules, and that's it. And they're just allowed to go on, and the police just let them go on. It's utter double standard.
But you and I will get accused of killing people because we're not being socially distant right now, and all that kind of stuff. Yet there's been no criticism at all. Hang on, you guys,
Andy, Black Lives Matter. But that's basically the excuse they pull out, isn't it? Is that they pull a slogan out, and that's the reason for doing it, and it trumps everything else.
But
we're allowed to break the law because reasons.
But aren't they some of the most vulnerable people?
Yes, they are. Although getting out in the sun is good. But,
they're far more vulnerable. Yeah, men are more vulnerable, obese people are more vulnerable.
Those with darker skin.
More,
And it seems to be because of the vitamin D deficiency. Yeah, absolutely. So we should encourage them to get out more. Just maybe not protest.
Crazy.
Yeah. Anything else been going on?
No, I think that's about it for the time being. It was only a couple of days ago we last did one. So.
Well, I don't want this to just be the
COVID cast, isn't it?
Well, look, I kind of have no problem. I think we've become a bit of a lockdown skeptic podcast. I have no problem with that because that's what's currently happening at the moment. What I don't want to become is just the regulation bashing podcast. Albeit, how can you not right now? With the stuff that comes out that is affecting everyone. This isn't just some niche thing. This is not me talking about the telecoms industry and how there's a particular regulation coming out from Ofcom and how angry I am about it.
I think we'd be neglecting our duties if we didn't scrutinise these things.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Thank you for watching and listening to Sounding Board. You can find us at soundingboard.com or your favourite podcast app. Please share if you think this was any good, in spite of Nick's coughing
and sneezing.
Sorry. Thank you very much.